My name's Stephen Walensky, and as a follow-up to DVD number 1, which is I Am That I Am, Experiencing the Teachings of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, comes the second DVD, Post-Deconstruction, The Death of the I, Nirvana as Extinction. In order to look at all of this, which leads us to the post-deconstruction understanding, we're going to use and graph together 2,500 years of philosophy, science, Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, philosophy, and linguistics. Graph them all together and take the creme de la creme of all of them so that we can deconstruct the sense of I. The sense of I is that which psychology and spirituality are entirely based. Because if there was no I, there would be nothing to get rid of, nothing to heal, nothing to transform. Nothing to be gotten rid of. There would be no I. And if there were no I, there would be no psychology and no spirituality. So if we can demonstrate that there actually is no I, all of these systems particularly collapse. Neuroscience in the brain, as we're referring it to, specifically relates to the brain and the nervous system and how the nervous system works and organizes, and how that specifically relates to spirituality and finding out who you are. So first, let's go back to DVD number 1 and talk about the word abstraction. The nervous system abstracts. It omits billions and billions of stimuli and extracts out only a small amount. That abstraction process was first noted in 1933 in a book called Science and Sanity by Alfred Korzybski. Korzybski actually laid out what he called the structural differential, which still stands today. The nervous system goes through particular modes, particular ways of abstracting, and from that omission process, you get a solid world and an I that perceives that world. So for example, sensation, and an abstraction of sensation. You have sensation, the nervous system omits lots of sensation, and from that sensation or condensed sensation is a sense of thought. Thought is condensed sensation. The sensation then produces what we call I. The I then labels objects in its perceptual apparatus and then describes them. Through each one of these abstracted steps, more and more information is omitted, and hence more of, in quotes, reality and the emptiness is gone. But the key piece to remember is that the I and what you call you, a person, a self, a being, arises through this omission and selecting out process in time. That means that the I and the perception that you have arises after the action and event have already occurred. That means that everything that you see has already occurred. In fact, everything that you see is already in past time. The illusion is that you're seeing something or can be in quotes, present time. So this I, which you call I or a self or a being, arises through a biochemical reaction in the brain. If you did not have this biochemical reaction going on in the brain, no I would arise, and you would basically be Terry Schiavo. What that means is that you would just be sitting there with no awareness of self, no awareness of person, no awareness of beingness. All of that arises through a chemical reaction. Now, since it arises through a chemical reaction, the illusion that there's an I that goes on, that an I existed before the chemical reaction, all of that is an illusion. The I arises after the action and event have already occurred. Now, recently, a lot of people have thought that the witness or the observer or the wearer or the knower somehow does not occur as like a biochemical reaction. The fact is that the witness, the knower, the observer, all of these things occur also through a biochemical reaction in the brain. If the brain did not have the appropriate fluids and information passing through it on a liquid level, then the I would not even appear, let alone a witness or an observer. So to imagine witnessing is anything other than biochemical is an illusion. Now, Gurdjieff said that the world is upside down. What he meant by the world is upside down is that the illusion is that I am doing something in present time. Just to give an example, let's suppose I'm sitting here, and the illusion is I have a thought called, I want to get a drink of water. Then I get up, and I get a drink of water. The illusion is that the I want to have a drink of water arose, and that's the reason I got up and got a glass of water. But the fact of the matter is that I got up and did that, and then the thought arose called, I want to have a drink of water. The thought called, I want to have a drink of water, arose after the action and event have already begun to happen. The thought, it's backwards. We perceive it as the thought comes before the action. Actually, the thought comes with and just after the action, and hence justifies the action. Now, if we take on a neurological level the idea that all the fluids in the brain come together in a biochemical reaction and an I arises. Now, this I, which is an abstracted representation of chemicals which come together, in other words, chemicals come together, and all of a sudden an I appears. How can an I that comes together by chemicals, that arises after the action and event have already occurred, have free will, let alone doership or choosership or authorship? What we have to appreciate in this is that a key thing in yoga, if we were to go, what is yoga's greatest hits? One of yoga's most important and greatest hits is, I am not the doer. Or, you are not the doer. Or, there is no doer. Why is there no doer? There's no doer, and you are not the doer, because the I that thinks it does arises after the action and event have already occurred. So, as Gurdjieff said, the world is upside down. I think I have the thoughts and I have volition and action, when actually all of the idea of volition and the thoughts and the justification for action and movement arise after the action has already occurred in past time. Now, if we looked at it biochemically, let's take the example of we have oxygen. So in other words, we have the thought called I. Prior to the thought called I, we have fluids. Prior to the fluids, we have chemicals. We have oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, potassium, the basic chemicals that make up the human body. Let's take it very simply. If we have oxygen, oxygen doesn't say, I am now going to choose to merge with hydrogen, and I'm going to form water. Obviously, because oxygen does not have a cerebral cortex, it does not produce thoughts, it does not have volition and action. So first, the fluids, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, potassium, come together as they come together, and from that, then An I arises, which then thinks it has volition. But if you break it down, prior to, these fluids had no volition. These fluids arose, and then the I appears. The I then begins to fantasize and imagine and abstract that it did something, that it has a past, it has a present, it has a future, it has a mission, that it has lessons to learn and ideas of its own, when in fact, it arises after the action event have already occurred. Another one of the great illusions is that there's a witness, and that the witness and what it witnesses. In other words, the witness and what it witnesses, called a thought or feeling or an emotion or sensation, as if they are separate. But the fact is that the thought and the witness, not only are they biochemically produced, they arise and subside together. This is really important. The illusion is that there is a witness and somehow a witnessed, or a perceiver and somehow a perceived. The illusion is that there's two separate, distinct substances. The illusion is that I am the witness, and a thought goes by called I love myself, or a thought goes by called I hate myself, or an emotional state goes by called this, and an emotional state goes by called that. The fact of the matter is that with each thought, I love myself and I hate myself. I'm glad I'm listening to this DVD. I hate this DVD. With each specific thought, there is a different observer and observed. In other words, the observer and the observed arise and subside together. So I love myself, and the thought called, and the observer arises and subsides together. I hate myself, and the observer arises and subsides together. And they arise and subside together as one specific unit. So therefore, it looks as if there's a thought separate from the observer or the witness, but actually they are one and the same. So what I'd like to do is a very, very brief meditation. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to let your eyes close. Notice a thought. Be the observer of the thought. What occurs if the observer and the thought are made of the same substance? Notice another thought. Be the observer of the thought. Notice what occurs if the observer of the thought and the thought are made of the same substance. Notice another thought. Be the witness of the thought. Notice what occurs if the witness of the thought and the thought are made of the same substance. Notice a emotion or sensation. Notice what occurs if the witness or observer of the emotion of the sensation and the sensation are made of the same substance. Notice another sensation or emotion. Be the perceiver of the sensation or emotion. Notice what occurs if the perceiver or witness of the sensation and the sensation are made of the same substance. Let's try it another way. Notice a thought. Be the observer of the thought. Notice what occurs when I say, what observer is observing that? Notice another thought. Witness the thought. Notice what occurs when I say, what witness is witnessing that? Notice a sensation or an emotion. Be the observer of the sensation or emotion. Notice what occurs when I say, what observer is observing that sensation? Notice another emotion or a sensation. Be the witness or the observer of that sensation or emotion. Notice what occurs when I say, what witness is witnessing that? Notice the no-state state, that blankness. And have part of your awareness noticing that blankness, while a part of you can open your eyes and come back to the room. Now the question is, why do you go blank? When you break the illusion of duality, Advaita means not two, one substance, not two. When the observer and the witness, when the witness and the whatever it's witnessing are one, everything disappears. So on a biological level, the witness, observer, the thought, or whatever it is, they are all happen biochemically and they arise and subside together. When they're seen as one, they disappear, and you're in the no-state state. So even on a biological level, and on a level of science, the no-state state becomes available when the illusion of two substances is dissolved. So part of the focus of the DVD is to, in the first sections, is to utilize the groundwork of science. Remember that when the Yoga Sutras was first released, it was called the Science of Yoga. All we're doing now is we are updating all of that material and giving you a scientific context to demonstrate you're not the doer and you're not who you think you are. The next thing I want to talk about is a process called transduction. Transduction is a process.
Всем привет! Это 51-й выпуск шоу «Кстати» с Азаматом Харламовым.
Similar to, basically in a transduction process, the brain and the nervous system, by abstraction, transduces noise into sound, sound into language, and language into words. So let me be even clearer. If I were to say to you, hello, how are you? You probably would respond with, fine, how are you? But actually, if the brain did not transduce those sounds, all that you would hear is a bunch of noise. The brain then takes that noise and makes it into, hi, how are you? It then further transduces that noise and sound into meaning. Fine, how are you? These sounds and words mean, how am I, referring to the body, then I refer back. Same thing goes with light as in sound. The nervous system and brain abstracts all of this material that you call the world and you call you. And what it does is it abstracts it and transduces light, making it a solid world. So what you're looking at is a solid world with boundaries, and I'm here and you're there, location and distances and all of these things. Without the brain's transduction process and without the brain's ability to do that, there would just be noise. And that's all. So the next question would be, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it make a sound? Well, it wouldn't make a sound without a brain or a nervous system to transduce that noise into sound and that sound into a meaning. And the visuals of a tree falling without the transduction process, there would just be light and no differentiation. It's after the transduction process that you get a tree falling and sound made, and you go, a tree has now fallen. In this way, it's key to appreciate that you have a pre-transduction state, which is just nothing. No I, no sound, no nothing, just nothing. And you have a post-transduction state. So in a pre-transduction state, there's no perceiver perceived, there's no I. With the brain and nervous system transducing, you have a post-transduction state with a perceiver perceived and an I. Now, once those sounds are made into words, and the words are given meanings through the transduction process and the abstraction process, again, everything is omitted and these little things are selected out, we then have a value system, and specifically a psychological and spiritual story or value system. In a pre-transduction state, there's no spirituality and there's no psychology. In a post-transduction state, after the brain and nervous system do it, you have a spirituality and a psychology. All of it is nervous system dependent. Since it is nervous system dependent, there is no spirituality or psychology prior to the nervous system and the brain transducing and abstracting. Now, one of the great illusions is there are spiritual values like justice, or truth with a capital T, or justice with a capital J, or virtue with a capital V. All of those that exists prior to the transduction process and abstraction process. But that isn't true, as we'll see in the next section. In section 1, we dealt with the deconstruction of the I at a biological level, or the level of the brain and nervous system. In a pre-transduction state or a pre-abstracted state, there's no I. It's only after the omission and selecting out process that the I arises. This section, I want to deal with it from the form of quantum physics. Now, just to add and to go back to DVD 1, the Buddhist Heart Sutra, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is none other than emptiness, emptiness is none other than form. The Buddha said that emptiness and form are the same. Actually, if emptiness and form are the same, there is neither emptiness nor form. What Einstein said 2,500 years later is that everything is emptiness and form is condensed emptiness. So in the theme of the nothingness, a student came to Maharaj and said to him, "What's it all about?" And he said, in the beginning, there was nothing absolutely. The nothing condensed down, and the I am appeared. And one day, it will thin out, and there'll be nothing again. Everyone that's listening to this DVD knows, when they were a kid, that you have an atom and you have electrons and so on. And the question is, how are things formed on a subatomic level? How things are formed on a subatomic level is particles from electron and leave, and they merge with and they form other units called molecules, and particles become subatomic particles become particles, and so on, and different things, materials are formed. These particular materials are formed, and all of a sudden they grow into other materials. So if you break it down in another way, let's start with a molecule of oxygen. Oxygen has electrons, hydrogen has electrons. They merge together. When they merge together, what you get is water. Now, what you could say is that everything in the physical universe occurs through subatomic particles and a subatomic nuclear exchange. In other words, electrons make an exchange, everything exchanges, forming new substances, and other substances die or disappear as new substances are formed through a nuclear change, even before chemicals. So first you get a nuclear or subatomic change, then it becomes molecules and chemicals, and through a chemical change you get the sense of I. So you could say that everything that happens only because of a nuclear exchange in particles in the atmosphere. Now, I want to relate it to two things. Number one is, that means that the body, which you call your body, which you call I, which you call the personality, is only there because of subatomic particles that we cannot see because your nervous system and brain can't perceive them. They are coming together or falling apart, and that gives the perception of a solid world. But actually, it's all happening prior to the perception, prior to the I perceiving it, which means that the I occurs only through subatomic particles coming together. Now, just as an atom or an element, the element of oxygen and the element of hydrogen, the oxygen didn't say, I am now going to merge and form with hydrogen and become water. There's no free will. They haven't got a cortex. They haven't got the idea of decision. They haven't got the idea of volition. What happens on a nuclear level is these things or these tendencies happen and material objects form. And then the I forms. So you could say in section 1 that the I arises through a biochemical reaction. In section 2, we're going to say that the I only arises through a nuclear reaction. Without the nuclear reaction, there would be no I. Without the nuclear exchange of subatomic particles, there would be no I. To imagine choice or volition, or that I am special, or that I'm the center of the universe, or that there's a meaning to what's going on, all of the meanings, lessons, everything that you imagine that you are doing occurs way after either the chemical reactions or the nuclear exchange that happens. Without this nuclear exchange happening, without the chemicals coming together from section 1, you would not only not have an I, but you would not have a perceiver, you would not have a witness, you would not have an observer, and as the Buddha said, there would be no world. So prior to, when I was with Nisargadatta, he went through a phase where all of a sudden his big word was prior to. Prior to the arising of the I, who were you? 8 days prior to conception, who were you?
एक आठवला भर किंवा हजारो वर्ष तू होता त्याच्या आत्ताच्या पुढे असणार हे मत्स्य उभं गंमत चिदानंद काय प्रजाला काय म्हणायचं
The state in which you were 8 days prior to conception or thousands of years prior to that, whatever that state is, that state ever prevails. Whether the beingness is there or the beingness disappears. That is the eternal state of yours.
As we had said in DVD number 1, if we have a nucleus and an electron that goes around it, if we expand the nucleus to the size of the sun and the electron to the size of the earth, there is more empty space between the nucleus and the electron than the sun and the earth. That means that most everything is emptiness with an occasional particle. If I handed you a quantum lens, what you would see is emptiness with an occasional particle. What I'm going to ask you to do for a second is put on a quantum lens, but rather than put on a quantum lens looking out, take the quantum lens and imagine the quantum lens looking the other way. Get a sense of the I and the body as emptiness. Get a sense of the witness as being condensed emptiness. As you witness the emptiness, notice what occurs if the witness of the emptiness and the emptiness are made of the same substance. Witness the emptiness. Take some emptiness and condense it down and make it into a thought called, I love myself. Now thin out the witness and thin out the thought and have them just as emptiness again. Notice the emptiness. Take the emptiness and allow it to condense down and form another witness. Take the emptiness, condense it down, and let it form another thought called, I hate myself. Have them both as the same emptiness. So the question we're going to bring up as we work through this material is there a thing called spiritual? Or are there just ideas called I love myself and that's somehow spiritual and I hate myself somehow is not spiritual? first thing we want to look at is what is the Logos? When Derrida says that the history of philosophy is the history of the search for a Logos, the Logos is the search for an originary source, an original transcendent presence that is beyond this universe, that sources or creates this universe, that is pure and untouched by this universe. So the history of philosophy is the search for this. In fact, the first 2,500 years of philosophies from Plato onward is a history for this Logos, the search for this Logos. And that in another universe, this Logos exists and somehow manifests, whether it be the gods of the universe playing or one single God. See, in the past we had many, many, many gods. And then came the all-inclusive, the new and improved. The new and improved, we have one God that does everything. But it's still a Logos. Now, what's happened with the Logos, or this source, this creative source, it's existed continually. The only way it's changed is that it's changed location and possibly name. So, for example, we had the Logos, the Word, which is the source of the original source of the universe. Then it changed to a transpersonal I. So it went from way out there to here. It went to a transcendent ego here, my own being, my own self. But it's only a change of location as a looking for a Logos, the original source of presence that creates the universe. Why? Why is because this is hardwired into the nervous system and brain. So if we go back to DVD number 1, what we find in DVD number 1 is, I said the nervous system and brain has 3 agreed upon functions: fight, flight, freeze. I added pray. Pray is similar to the search for a Logos. There's an old saying, there are no atheists in foxholes. Everybody becomes a believer. Why? Because one of the purposes of the nervous system is to organize chaos. If we can find this original source, Logos, presence, creative thing that created all of this thing, if we can find this God, then everything becomes organized. We have a reason, we have a plan, we have a purpose, the meaningful life, all is dependent upon the finding of this particular Logos. What happens if this Logos, this originary source, this originary presence, is just an abstracted representation of nothing? It's just an idea, just a concept. What Maharaj used to say was that everything is dependent upon first the I am. A man came to Maharaj once and he said, "Oh, the mother creates the universe and I worship the mother." And Maharaj said to him, "Who came first, you or the mother?" The man said, "Well, first the mother came and I worshiped the mother and then I came after the mother." He said, "Oh, no. First you were there. First the I am. First the condensation. First the abstraction has to occur in the I am. And then we have the search for the Logos, which I worship, which will then grant me grace." It is an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction. Okay. So Western philosophy, particularly starting in about 1967 with Jacques Derrida, comes to the realization and breaks all of this down and says that all of our tendencies is to search for this Logos, and I would say it is hardwired into the brain and nervous system. The second thing is that the philosophy of spirituality was always a philosophy of language. Now remember,
Всем привет, это 51-й выпуск шоу «Кстати» с Азаматом.
that the articles, through the abstraction process and the transduction process, what you're getting is the production of sound and language. Now, the illusion of sound and language in philosophy or in spirituality or in psychology, and this began with Plato, is that out there is this truth with a capital T. Plato called it in the land of perfect forms or perfect ideas, that outside there actually exists a truth or a justice or a virtue or a holy idea that we here are supposed to strive for. But the truth of the matter is that that isn't so. Because in the early 1900s, Ferdinand de Saussure showed and demonstrated something that is extraordinary. There are no ready-made ideas outside of language. I want to say that again. There are no ready-made ideas outside of language. Through language, we create, when I say we create, the nervous system and brain creates a linguistic word verbal system that has justice in it, or virtue in it, or good in it, or bad in it, or high in it, or low in it, has all of this stuff in it. But there is no virtue, or justice, or truth, or spirituality outside of the linguistic system. We, through the linguistic system, create a system where these actions are considered truthful and virtuous and moral or immoral, and other actions are considered not spiritual and immoral and untruthful. But the fact is that there's no truth outside of the word truth. There's no spiritual outside of the word spiritual. And what is the agreed upon meaning in a philosophical tautology, that is what it is. There does not exist outside of that. Now, in the 1930s, 40s, Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, called all of this a language game. For Wittgenstein, it is all a language game. We are playing with words that have no meaning outside of the linguistic system in which the words are operating. There is no truth outside of the word truth. There's no big truth with a capital T out in the sky. There's no virtue with a capital V. There's no divine or holy ideas outside of this. That's all Plato. That is all Platonic. Once that breaks down and you understand how the brain and nervous system work and how language comes from the brain and nervous system, and it's an agreed upon way of describing language. All language is metaphor. All language is a metaphoric representation. And if we go back to DVD number 1, all language and philosophy is not only a metaphor, it's an abstracted representation. It represents something that does not exist. You could say it exists in language only, as a linguistic proposition, but it doesn't exist outside of the language itself. Hence, Wittgenstein would even call spirituality a language game. And that's all. Now, the question in many spiritual circles is, what is the mind? The mind is a word. a word that exists in language only. We take the mind as we take words for things that actually exist. The map is not the territory. The word is not the thing it represents. So there's no I outside of the word I. There's no truth outside of the word truth. There's no mind outside of the word mind. All language is metaphor. All systems of spirit, either spiritual or psychological, are language games, and they exist only as abstracted representations of nothing, metaphoric representations of something that doesn't exist. Once a student went to Ramana Maharshi and said, "I'm having problems with my mind." And Ramana responded, "Show me your mind."